it's interesting that you mentioned kind of the industry, and I did want to connect into something that our chief veterinary officer, Dr. Jill Holmes, is really strongly wanting to do. We're committed to highlighting the concepts such as equine learning theory, which have originated, research in the field of equine science, and how the science of people like Jennifer Zelig, who's working on, writing it down and working with David. And I know that Karen Rolfe she's had some series where she's working with both academics and practitioners. And so how do you envision the science intersecting with the equine industry in the next 5 or 10 years? And when we ask that, it's because we'd like you to influence how we do it.
There are some people who don't care about why. They don't care. They just tell me, they just want to know how to do it, and it works. And other people are really interested in the mechanics behind it all. The science, basically is explaining what's happening, whether it's, in the mind, how the brain works, the neurotransmitters, the chemicals that are released. And some people are really, really interested in that. And I think it gives a lot of credence to why you would do something a certain way. So I think science is important, and I think it's only going to grow. But you can have all the science in the world and not know how to connect with your horse. So I think we need both. And, I work with Dr. Anne Hemingway, and I do a lot of research myself, and I often look into human psychology and the science around, what makes people's brains tick, because we have the same chemicals that go through our body that horses do. And the why we do certain things is often similar to horses, because it comes back to our old brain and our instincts and what kind of things trigger certain reactions. And then I've been able to use that when I find people having trouble with horses and they give them a lot of treats. And I'll say to them, why did you give the horse a treat? And they'd go, I don't know. Or the horse did something for me. And I said, well, what are you triggering when you give that horse a treat? And they're like, what do you mean? I said, dopamine. You're triggering dopamine, and dopamine is a pleasure neurotransmitter. It's a pleasure chemical. Training is not pleasure. When you are trying to train, unless it's trick training repetitive behaviors, one-time behaviors, and things like that, yes, of course. I mean, I've known the best circus trainers in the world, and they'll use treats, they'll use positive reinforcement, but they use it very strategically and very knowledgeably. But when we do it, it's more, I think we get more dopamine out of it than the horse does, because we're very caring. We want to tell the horse we love him and it's good, but we don't realize that's interrupting the training efficacy. And so I'm not against treats. I'm against the indiscriminate use of them, or the not knowing what that's triggering in the horse. And so, I was studying that in a different realm, and I suddenly saw the same thing happening with horses. And so when you're training a horse, you don't want to trigger dopamine, you want to trigger serotonin, which is respect and self-respect. And that's what happens in the learning frame of mind. And you want to trigger oxytocin, which is connection. You don't want to trigger dopamine in a training situation, because then you start to get all kinds of aberrant behaviors, or aberrant, I don't know how you say it in American, behaviors that you go, I don't know why the horse is doing that, but it's disconnected from what you wanted them to do. And it's more connected now to the pleasure and to the treat. This is very obtuse, the way that I'm saying it. I just want to make it as simple as possible. But when people started to realize that, then they started to understand what kind of responses they wanted to trigger in their horses, what kind of chemicals. And for them, the science really helped. Other people, they just go, "Oh, if it doesn't work, then just say so. I don't need to know why." So that's where I think science can really help make more sense of things for people who have more inquisitive minds.
Wow.
But in the
Linda,
end, horses are pretty simple.
you just proved it. So I'm just watching some of the comments that come up. Jessica Go says that's a genius explanation for food. So I'm sorry, it jumped off the screen for food reward. And the other one is you just proved to me you're still doing the science to,
Totally.
you're definitely using the science and moving it into practice. And we're absolutely looking forward to being intentional about helping move the whole industry in our International Horsemanship Foundation. And that's what Dr. Jill Holmes is very excited about. And now with the bigger infrastructure and the new organization that we have in our connection to you, we look forward to helping the whole world be better off. And gosh, thank you for that. I know that it was a lot of scientific detail. Unfortunately, I was able to keep up. But it means that we really are using theory and science to move ahead in the practice. And then because you're such a teacher, you see that people will consume it different ways. So how do they want to consume it?
And
Maybe
I
you don't need all that, right?
Yeah, science gives credibility to the things you're doing when it can be explained, And in talking about using treats, that's not the only way to positively reinforce a horse. And, when you're trying to get a horse to know that he's right, how do you do that? How do you tell a horse he's right? Because that's really what a horse wants to know. Otherwise, he's in confusion. And if you want to trigger pleasure, then that's, you should know how to do that. If I want to trigger serotonin or oxytocin, I should know how to do that. And I think science gives that, more seeking mind who wants to know the intricate details of it. It helps to satisfy that. And Dr. Anne Hemingway in England, she's an incredible researcher on all these kinds of things. And she just came and spent 2 weeks with me. Actually, more than 2 weeks. She was at the conference that you came to.
Yeah,
and,
we saw her. And she brought a researcher along. Yeah, she brought a researcher along with her. Yeah.
Incredible work that she does. And I had a conversation with her about this when I was in England last year teaching. And I said, I've got this theory around dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin. And she listened, and she's very scientific, and very well researched. And she looked at me and she said, I think you're onto something. But she said, you also need to know that there's more than 3 or 4 neurotransmitters. There's thousands of them. And she said, if we want to group them into those things, if you're talking about it in a little bit of an anecdotal way or making it something that's very easy to understand, she said, I agree. You're absolutely on the right track. So scientifically, I'm sure there's some researchers and scientists that could take me to task on that. But when I look at what it triggers in a horse, that's what I'm interested in teaching people. It's like, how do you trigger those kinds of responses, whatever the chemical is behind it.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that.
I sounded very blonde, but anyway, there you go.
Oh no, well, I'm married to a professor, and I'm an education freak myself. So thank you for that.